Hello everyone, welcome back to the off-season here. We have just wrapped up our Season 6, a really amazing season in which we finally won a bowl game, and not just that, a BCS bowl game, had an amazing season, conference championship, Heisman winner, a lot of All-Americans, just a great year for Olympia, put us on the map. A lot of turnover you will see coming up, but a great game against North Carolina in which really most of our games this season were not close. We had one loss to Utah, which was an amazing game, really close, back and forth affair. We had a few other close games this year, but for the most part, the schedule was thoroughly dominated and really has left Olympia thinking of moving conferences. And so we will see in this offseason recap that I've compiled here of our boys just how well we have done and what things have changed and where the NCAA will have us playing next year based on alignment and what the university has decided to do. So of course, as usual, this is your host, Jay Brandon, and we will go through the Olympia offseason. We're kind of starting with a review of the North Carolina game here, just getting stats listed and showing everything that happened. Really, again, a great game here. So then we go to where we finished the season ranked, and we actually do finish the season ranked number 2. No first place votes, but it's hard to argue that when Georgia had a perfect season and dominated in the championship. So we will end up the season number 2. Mountain West Conference champion, or Boise State, also not champion, of course, won their bowl game. We look at Utah. They actually ended up winning. Kyle Linehan finishing his career at Utah, a ranked team. A win, a really good game for him. He will be looking, of course, to go to the NFL draft and should be expected to be at least a top 3 rounder, I would think. Dylan Murdoch had an amazing game, amazing career for him. Just a great receiver. We look at Utah State, and Atari was able to pull off a victory. They finished number 10 in the nation, actually, at 10-3. Tari Mason also having a pretty decent game here. He had about 211 yards for 2 touchdowns. Really just happy to see him doing well. Of course, you had him running a little bit. Jason Burnett, not a great game from him. San Diego State also won their game against Colorado. BYU got absolutely blasted by Texas in the Big 12. And Georgia, of course, won their championship game against Notre Dame by a large margin. Darius McIntyre does officially pick up the Heisman Trophy. I really, it was a pretty good season. Not a great season, though, but he still manages to pull it off. He also finishes top 10 in the Maxwell rankings, as well as Baron Gajkowski, who unfortunately got injured. Dylan Murdoch, you can see there at 11. He was really just a great player this year. For the Walter Camp, Darius McIntyre finishes 5th, with Dylan Murdoch right behind him at 7. And again, just an amazing season for those 2 athletes. For the Bednarik, Curtis Simpson, far and away the best linebacker in the nation. You can see John Schweiss was a little bit further down. Elijah Davis, strong safety, playing more of a money backer role, was really good this season for Utah. And then Brett Kraft and Ryan Williams also were just phenomenal players. Ryan Williams, a big breakout season for him as a senior. For the Nagurski, Curtis Simpson, again, he swept all the awards he could because, he just had a phenomenal season. He's only a sophomore, a redshirt sophomore. You can expect him to be even better going forward. If he doesn't leave early for the draft, of course. For the O'Brien, Gajkowski was almost there. Somehow McIntyre isn't even listed. Not sure how that happens. Obviously for the Walker, we wouldn't have anybody, but we did have a phenomenal season from our running backs. Dylan Murdoch wins the Bolitnikoff, as he well deserved the best receiver in the nation by a large margin. Of course, it helps when you have Kyle Linehan as your quarterback. Tight end, we don't have anybody here. Was a down year for our tight ends. They both got touches for sure, and weren't a huge focus of the offense. Definitely want to see that change going forward. Nobody on the Outland or the Remington for Olympia this year, and that's alright. Our line was good, not amazing, but they were good. Ryan Williams wins the Lombardi. It was a 1-2 punch of Ryan Williams and Curtis Simpson all year long. Quarterbacks really just didn't get a whole lot of time to throw in the pocket, as Curtis Simpson wins the Butkus, of course. And then you can even see John Schweiss down there. He was in the top 10, so good for him. John Schweiss had a down year in his final year, but it still was good enough to be a captain of the defense and let Curtis Simpson, eat. Elijah Davis wins the Thorpe with Brett Kraft right behind him. I don't know, that was a really close battle there. Bradley Garrett top 5 as well. Elijah Davis, again for Utah, just had a phenomenal season as a money backer. Think of him more as like a Tyrann Mathieu type. Mike Harris wins the Groza despite, I thought, a down year. He just was such a consistent player over his career. And then the Guy Award, we didn't have anybody. Zach Schuster wins the Jet Award with Eddie Jong top 5. That was another 1-2 punch Olympia had on the return games. Schuster was just so dynamic. All-Americans, we have Dylan Murdoch, of course. I mean, he really just swept everything as well. Ryan Williams and Curtis Simpson made the first team. John Schweiss, Brett Kraft, and Mike Harris and Zach Schuster also made the first team. Olympia just really phenomenal across the nation. If we look at the second team here, see Robert Humphrey actually made it. Robert Humphrey was a really surprisingly good player. Bradley Garrett, of course. Didn't expect him to really take off like he did. Ryan Westergren, we can see on the freshman all NCAA team for BYU. We're going to probably have to see BYU next year, and I'm not looking forward to playing against Westergren. Rashad Hines, another really good freshman who had a great season. And then James McIntosh, who had one of the most underrated seasons, I think, in Olympia history. He never really got an interception. I think he got one, but wasn't, like, stats-wise the best. But, man, he could shut down anybody. All Mountain West Conference, you're going to notice Olympia sweeps everything here. McIntyre, Doherty, Savoy, Robbins, Poole, Jason Clemens, Ryan Williams. I mean, Joe Wright, Curtis Simpson, John Schweiss, Robert Humphrey, Brett Kraft, James McIntosh. You can see Byron Handy didn't even make the first team. That's how good James McIntosh was. Mike Harris, Bradley Garrett, Schuster. Then on the second team, we had Lee House, Jason Edwards, Richard Fields. I mean, it was just Anthony Freeman. Olympia dominated this conference, and it showed. Darius Watton, really good year for him. Kevin Patterson had a pretty decent season. Cody Calloway, of course, was always good. And then Byron Robinson. Record set this year, Darius McIntyre set the all-time career passing touchdown record, as well as he set the passing yards in a career record. Of course, taking that from Tyler Hunt. And then if we look here, actually receiving, no records broken. Defensively, Brett Kraft ends with the most interceptions in a career, just barely edging out Byron Handy. And Curtis Simpson, far and away the sacks in a career record holder. He will continue that record, of course, for at least another season, maybe 2. And then rushing wise, McIntyre blew that away. Rushing touchdowns in a game actually goes to JJ Thomas. He had a really great season. Rushing yards in a career goes to McIntyre. Again, McIntyre ends up a dynamic runner. If we look at season stats, McIntyre ended up 165 for 254 for almost 2,000 yards, 30 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He was just so much more, safe this year. Didn't have any amazing passing games, but he really also wasn't throwing us out of games with interceptions. Christian Armstrong, I thought, had a pretty decent season as a backup. 50%, you expect his accuracy to be kind of there, in and out. Wesley Dunmore was more of a runner, but he had an okay arm. Roa Latu really disappointed me. We'll see how those 3 go forward. Rushing yards this season, McIntyre still led our team, but Kirk Doherty really close behind him at 1,200 yards. He was phenomenal on the ground this season. 9 touchdowns for him. I mean, what can you say when your top 2 guys have 2,500 yards combined? And then, not to mention, JJ Thomas had 600 yards right behind him. I think JJ Thomas could have been a 1,000-yard rusher if he got more attempts, frankly. Just a phenomenal season running. And then, of course, Kevin Tate, our fullback, with 300 yards. Didn't expect him to get up that high, but man, he was really good. Could be the next Kosi Mensah. We'll have to see going forward. Receiving yards, Lee House led this team. He pretty much was the only receiver, I'd say, this season. Schuster got some touches, and when Schuster got touches, he made things happen. So he'll be one going forward, but really disappointing season for our receivers, and I'm not even sure that was because of them or because of the game plan. I'd like to see them get a little more involvement in the future seasons. Brandon Clark actually had a really nice season as a tight end, really more of a outside tight end, I think like a Kyle Pitts or something. Blocking this year was really solid. I can't say we had too many holes on our O-line. Of course, you could always hope to be better, but this was a pretty good offensive line. Schweiss led the team in tackles this year, as you would expect. Schweiss continuing to be a tackle leader for this team. Probably holds the Olympia record for tackles if I had to guess. Brett Kraft had the most interceptions, and it wasn't close. Robert Humphrey had 3, Schweiss had 2, and then we had quite a few guys that had 1 interception each. Brett Kraft was just a monster on every side of the ball his career. Curtis Simpson with 16 sacks this year, and Ryan Williams with 14 right behind him. I mean, that is insane. Those two were just sacking everything in sight, and then tackles for loss, it was Curtis Simpson by a landslide. Even Ryan Williams with half that, but still with 21 himself. I mean, that's insane. Forced fumbles, again, Curtis Simpson. Again, this guy was just... I can't even describe how good he was. He will for sure be looking top 2 rounds in the NFL when he goes to the draft, inevitably. Solo tackles, again, Schweiss led, and then it was Humphrey actually really close behind him, surprisingly. Kicking this year, Mike Harris was not as good as he's been, I would say, but at the same time, he won the Groza and was solid. I mean, when it came down to it at the end, he could be relied on. And then punting, Byron Robinson. I think he's a really good punter. We just don't punt a whole lot, so it's hard to get an accurate kind of view on what he is. Kick return game, Schuster with 1,500 yards on the season and 4 touchdowns. I mean, he was nuts. He was absolutely cracked. Eddie Zhang with 600 yards almost himself and a touchdown. Great returning backfield there. For the career, so we're looking at this because Darius McIntyre will likely be declaring for the draft. He finishes with 83 touchdowns and 47 INTs and about 6,500 yards passing. Great season, great career for him passing the ball. Rushing wise, he ends up with 4,000 yards and 44 touchdowns. So you know you're getting a more Lamar Jackson type of quarterback in the NFL. We'll see if that hurts his profile or helps his profile to scouts. Receiving wise, Ben Thompson finishes with 1,200 yards just about and 6 touchdowns. A really balanced career from him, but nothing spectacular. Not a lot of drops over his career. And then Ryan Jones finishes with 700 yards and 2 touchdowns. Most of that came in the last 2 seasons, I'd have to say. He really flourished later in his career. 10 drops though, and loads of time, so he definitely was not the most sure with his hands. Jason Clemens finishes with 40 pancakes and 15 sacks. Really great run blocker. We'll have to see how he translates maybe to the NFL. Darius Robbins, a solid guy, just not great at any one thing, but we'll definitely miss him, another Utah recruit. Brett Kraft finishes his career with 118 solo tackles, 125 total. He finishes with 14 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 16 interceptions, of course, and that translated to 3 touchdowns in his career, 3 pick sixes for him. He was phenomenal. Cody Callaway finishes with 185 tackles himself, 14 of those for loss. No sacks though, surprisingly. Just didn't bring him on blitzes a lot. 7 interceptions for him, and he also got in some of the fumble game and got 1 touchdown as well. Tanner Clay finishes his career with 186 tackles from a cornerback position, which is insane. He was just really good at tackling, not great in coverage, unfortunately. And he does finish with a touchdown as well. John Schweiss, of course, we have to mention him, finishes with 248 tackles in his career. Just a phenomenal career from him. 4 interceptions, and we know at least one of those went for a pick 6. I'm curious, actually 2 of those went for a pick 6. He was so good in coverage, so good at tackling. Everything he did was great. Byron Handy with 153 tackles as well. No sacks for him, but 15 interceptions, 1 behind Brett Kraft. He led Olympia in interceptions until the very end when Brett Kraft took it from him in that last game there. He finishes with 2 interceptions, or 2 touchdowns himself. And then, of course, we have a few other guys that got some time here and there. Ryan Williams barely played in his career, but when he played, he was dominant. 44 tackles, 27 of them for loss, 16 of those were sacks. I mean, he was just phenomenal. Zach Cook finishes a very decent backup quarterback. He got some limited time in the nickel formation occasionally. Dustin Rich, didn't really get a whole lot from him, unfortunately, but he was a great player. Joe Wright really came in towards the end of his career as well and was a pretty solid defensive tackle. Nothing much else to say for him. And that is it for defense. For his career, Mike Harris finishes 80 for 90 with 88%. And I mean, not much to say. He was phenomenal for his career. I mean, this guy's got to be looking to get some NFL gigs. Super accurate and very good leg. Oh man, kick returning, Brett Kraft. I mean, the fact that he didn't kick return just shows how necessary he was on defense, because he was phenomenal kick returning. 2,000 yards for him. If we look at Atari Mason's career, he actually finishes with about 6,000 yards passing, 59 touchdowns, and 39 interceptions, which is crazy considering he was a wide receiver a lot of that. Finishes with about 1,500 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns. And then receiving for his career, he finishes with 700 yards and 14 touchdowns. A lot of touchdowns as a receiver. You know, we'll see. Maybe he's got a future in the NFL. Probably not, though. Kai Linehan finishes with 1,200 yards passing, 105 touchdowns to 30 interceptions. A phenomenal career for him. That completion percentage is a little under what you'd expect, though. 260 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns. Expected more of him on the ground game for sure. Murdoch finishes with 3,200 yards receiving, 32 touchdowns. I mean, talk about a phenomenal wide receiver to have for a career as a quarterback. Only 7 drops speaks volumes of this kid. So if we look at coach security, obviously all 3 of our coaches are looking at full-time security here after that season, where offensively, defensively, and just overall we were solid 100% of the way through. Can't expect them to be going anywhere unless they get new contracts, of course, which is always a possibility, and we will see coming up. Olympia finishes 13-1, which ties the highest we've been, but we finished with a bowl game for the first time ever. And if you notice our progression, 3-9 to 8-5 to 7-6 to 11-3 to 13-1 2 years in a row, conference championships the last 3 years, and a BCS bowl win in our last year. This program is definitely on the rise, and is waiting to see if they can make it even higher. Of course, national championship is the goal, but you have to be proud of where they're at so far. For our offseason recruiting, Nate Hall is the only offensive lineman we're looking at, and probably will be our only guy. And this was the big news of the offseason. Oklahoma looking for a head coach. Offers Coach Eric Cook, and after 6 seasons at the helm of Olympia, Coach Eric Cook takes over a previously 4-8 and 3-9 SEC team, Oklahoma. And that was it. Olympia was looking for a new head coach as well as new coordinators, as their coordinators would also leave. And Coach Cook takes over for Oklahoma. 1-0 team to another. Tavita Pritchard takes over as the head coach of Florida Atlantic, and Coach Chris Brad actually gets fired for Todd Mayfield at Louisville. Chris Brad would come back as our offensive coordinator now, a little bit of a coordinator swap there. And we would get no new defensive coordinator. Tyler Hunt would actually become our head coach. So Olympia looking to stay in-house. Hunt had been on the staff and coaching a little bit in high school. And of course he's barely out of Olympia. I want to say he's either 26 or 25 right now. A super young coach. He comes out as one of our best quarterbacks we've had so far, and now will be our our head coach. So we'll see what he can do with his former coordinator, Chris Brad. Sam Franklin decided to transfer, but actually ended up getting persuaded by new coach Tyler Hunt to stay, just because he knew he would get a lot of playtime. Brandon Clark, after a breakout freshman season, unfortunately was deciding to transfer to Air Force, and we could not convince him to stay. So he will be gone, which really sucks. I mean, Stitch Robinson will be getting a lot more of the focus as our tight end. That at least I can live with, because Stitch Robinson is amazing. Really hurts to lose a guy like Brandon Clark, though. He was like a very raw Kyle Pitts, whereas Stitch Robinson is more of your Jason Witten archetype. Moving forward, of course, we go to the season stats and look again at Darius McIntyre, who is declared for the NFL draft. He will no longer be here. He's already hired an agent. And Olympia has had so much turnover recently, a 74th top class in the nation. You have to wonder if Olympia can sustain the success they've had. Olympia would get moved over to the Big 12 along with Utah State, and a little bit of a rebalancing in the Big 12 as now they have a North and a South division. Independence, you'll see Air Force and Navy and Army, so we have all the military schools back in Independence. Boise State pretty much alone now with San Diego State in the Mountain West Conference, and that will be it for our off-season. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you with the new season and some streams coming soon. See y'all later.